The crisp October air carried a chill that cut through Eleanor Rose's thin coat as she stood in the shadow of Silvercreek's train station, her entire life packed into a single worn carpetbag at her feet. The whistle of the departing train echoed across the valley, taking with it her last connection to the life she once knew. She was alone now, truly alone, in a town where not a single soul knew her name. Eleanor tucked a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear and squared her shoulders. 22 years old and starting over in a place she'd chosen by closing her eyes and pointing at a map. Silvercreek, Colorado, 1876. As good a place as any to disappear. Miss? You look a bit lost. The station master approached, his silver mustache twitching with concern. I'm looking for lodgings, Eleanor replied, her Eastern accent immediately marking her as an outsider. Somewhere respectable but modest in cost. The man nodded toward the main street. Widow Peters runs a boarding house 3 blocks down. Clean place, fair prices. Tell her Joe sent you. Eleanor thanked him and picked up her bag. The weight of it was nothing compared to the burden of memories she carried. Philadelphia seemed a lifetime away now, though it had been only 3 days since she'd fled. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard structure with neat white curtains and a small sign in the window. Inside, Mrs. Peters, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed Eleanor to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. Rents due weekly, meals included except Sundays, the widow explained. No men allowed upstairs, no exceptions. That suits me perfectly, Eleanor said, offering a rare smile. I don't know a single man in Silvercreek, and I plan to keep it that way. Mrs. Peters raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. Town's hiring at the Mercantile. Owner needs someone who can keep books and has nice penmanship. By the following afternoon, Eleanor had secured employment at Silvercreek Mercantile, owned by a balding man named Mr. Grant, who seemed more impressed by her education than suspicious of a young woman arriving alone in a frontier town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A place to hide, to heal, to forget. For 2 weeks, Eleanor kept to herself, working diligently during the day and retreating to her room at night. She wrote letters she never mailed and avoided the curious gazes of townspeople. She was polite but distant, a stranger by choice. Everything changed on a crisp Tuesday morning when the bell above the Mercantile door jingled and in strode a man who seemed too large for the modest shop. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he filled the space with his presence. Morning, Mr. Grant, his deep voice carried across the room. Got that order ready? Mr. Grant emerged from the back room, smiling broadly. Pace, right on time. Miss Rose has it all prepared for you. Eleanor looked up from her ledger, momentarily frozen as the man's gaze found hers. Hayes Morgan was well known in these parts. According to the town gossip, she'd overheard owner of the Broken Spur Ranch, widower of 3 years, and one of the most respected men in the county. Miss Rose is new to our little establishment, Mr. Grant continued. Been handling the books like she was born to it. Hayes Morgan tipped his hat, a gesture that managed to be both polite and somehow intimate. Madam. Eleanor nodded stiffly, retrieving the prepared order from beneath the counter. Your supplies, Mr. Morgan. Everything's itemized here. She passed him the list, careful not to let their fingers touch. He reviewed the paper, then looked up with an expression she couldn't quite read. Impressive handwriting, Miss Rose. You from back east? Philadelphia, she answered, immediately regretting the admission. The less anyone knew about her, the better. Long way from home. His voice held no judgment, just a statement of fact. This is my home now, Eleanor said firmly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Something flickered in those gray eyes, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit who understood loss. But the moment passed quickly, and Hayes Morgan simply nodded, paid his bill, and gathered his supplies. At the door he paused. Town's having a harvest festival this Saturday. Good way to meet folks, if you're of a mind to. Before Eleanor could formulate a polite refusal, he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of leather and pine in his wake. He's right, you know, Mr. Grant said, startling Eleanor from her thoughts. Been here near a month and barely spoken to anyone outside this store. Not healthy for a young woman. I prefer my own company, Eleanor replied, returning to her ledger. Hayes Morgan lost his wife in 73. Fever took her. He raised their boy, Thomas, all on his own. Fine man, respected by everyone from here to Denver. Eleanor kept her eyes on her work. I didn't ask for his history, Mr. Grant. The older man chuckled. No, you surely didn't. But history has a way of shaping us all, Miss Rose. Even those of us trying to outrun it. His words struck closer to home than he could have known, and Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she recorded the day's transactions. She had come to Silvercreek to be a stranger, nameless and forgettable. The last thing she needed was the attention of a man like Hayes Morgan, who looked at her as if he could see straight through the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. Saturday arrived with golden sunshine that belied the autumn chill. Eleanor had fully intended to spend the day in her room, perhaps reading one of the novels Mrs. Peters had lent her. But her landlady had other ideas, practically pushing Eleanor out the door with instructions to enjoy herself, for heaven's sake. The town square had been transformed with bunting and stalls selling everything from apple cider to hand-knitted scarves. Children darted between adults, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the fiddle music that filled the air. For a moment, Eleanor stood at the edge of it all, feeling more acutely alone in the crowd than she had in her solitary room. Miss Rose. She knew the voice before she turned. Hayes Morgan stood a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. Beside him was a boy of about 12, with the same storm-gray eyes but darker hair. Mr. Morgan, she acknowledged, including the boy in her nod. This must be your son. Thomas, Hayes confirmed, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Tommy, this is Miss Rose from the Mercantile. Madam, Thomas said, with a small bow that mimicked his father's courtly manners. We were about to get some cider, Hayes said. Would you care to join us? Eleanor opened her mouth to decline, then hesitated at the hopeful look on Thomas's face. That would be pleasant. They walked together through the festival, Thomas darting ahead occasionally to greet friends, but always returning to his father's side. Hayes pointed out various townspeople, offering brief, often amusing insights that made the strange faces feel more familiar. Dr. Simmons delivered half the children in this county, he explained, nodding toward an elderly gentleman examining apple preserves. Claims he can predict the weather by the ache in his left knee. And can he? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her interest. Hayes's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that warmed the air between them. Better than the almanac, most days. They stopped at a booth selling hot cider, and Hayes purchased 3 cups. As they sipped the spiced drink, Eleanor found herself relaxing despite her best intentions. There was something disarming about Hayes Morgan's straightforward manner, his lack of pretense. Pa says you're good with numbers, Thomas piped up suddenly. I'm terrible at arithmetic. Miss Jenkins says I need to apply myself, but the numbers jump around like grasshoppers. Eleanor smiled at the boy's description. I had a teacher once who taught me to think of numbers as a story. 7 isn't just a symbol. It's 7 horses or 7 days of the week. Thomas considered this, his brow furrowed. Does that really help? It helped me, Eleanor replied honestly, though I suspect everyone's mind works differently. Tommy's more inclined towards stories than sums, Hayes said, his expression fond as he looked at his son. Gets that from his mother. She used to make up the most wonderful tales. An awkward silence fell at the mention of his late wife. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to navigate this reminder of loss. Thomas broke the tension. Pa, can I go see the pie judging? Billy's ma entered her apple crumb. Hayes nodded, and the boy dashed off, weaving through the crowd with the agility of youth. Left alone, Hayes and Eleanor walked slowly toward a quieter corner of the square. He's a fine boy, Eleanor offered. You've done well with him. Hayes looked at her with surprise. Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but he's the best of both of us, his mother and me. He hesitated, then added, Mr. Grant mentioned you're from Philadelphia. What brings a city woman all the way to Silvercreek? Eleanor stiffened. A change of scenery. Must have been quite a view you were leaving behind, Hayes observed mildly. Mr. Morgan, while I appreciate your kindness today, I should make something clear. I came to Silvercreek for privacy, not to satisfy the town's curiosity about my past. Instead of being offended, Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough, Miss Rose. We all have parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden. He glanced around at the festivities. But Silvercreek has a way of making strangers into neighbors, whether they plan on it or not. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted near the judging tent. Raised voices and a woman's cry cut through the festive atmosphere. Without hesitation, Hayes moved toward the disturbance, Eleanor following instinctively. They found Thomas standing protectively in front of a young girl while 3 older boys jeered at them. One boy held a ribbon that clearly belonged to the tearful girl. "That's enough, Jenkins," Hayes said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. The tallest boy, perhaps 15, flushed but maintained a defiant stance. "Just having some fun, Mr. Morgan. Sarah's always bragging about her ma's ribbons. Seems to me she's earned the right," Hayes replied, nodding toward the blue ribbon in the boy's hand. "And I reckon you owe her an apology." The standoff lasted only seconds before the boy thrust the ribbon back at the girl and muttered something that passed for an apology. As the bullies slunk away, Hayes knelt before the girl, whose tears were already drying. "You all right, Sarah?" She nodded, clutching her recovered prize. "Yes, sir. Thank you, Thomas." She smiled shyly at the younger boy, who looked both proud and embarrassed by the attention. "Tommy did the right thing," Hayes said, rising to his feet. "Standing up for someone who needs it is always the right choice." The girl's mother arrived then, thanking Hayes profusely before leading her daughter away. Thomas, still glowing with his father's approval, rejoined his friends with a new swagger in his step. "You've taught him well," Eleanor said quietly. Hayes turned to her, his expression serious. "I'm trying. A boy needs to know what kind of man he should become." He hesitated, then added, "Would you allow me to escort you back to Mrs. Peters's? Festival will be winding down soon, and the cowboys from the outlying ranches get a bit rowdy after sundown." Eleanor knew she should refuse, maintain her distance. But something about Hayes Morgan's quiet strength and the care he showed his son had breached her defenses. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." They walked in comfortable silence through the golden afternoon light. At the boarding house steps, Eleanor turned to bid him goodbye, but was startled by the intensity in his gaze. "Miss Rose Eleanor, if I may, I'd be honored if you'd join Tommy and me for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Nothing formal, just a meal among friends." Friends. The word stirred something long dormant in Eleanor's heart. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself the luxury of friendship, of connection. "I'm not sure that would be wise," she said, even as a part of her yearned to accept. Hayes nodded, accepting her reluctance without question. "The invitation stands, whenever you feel ready." As he turned to leave, Eleanor found herself calling after him. "Mr. Morgan Hayes." The name felt strange on her tongue. Thank you for today. It was more enjoyable than I expected." His smile transformed his weathered face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek that she hadn't noticed before. "Glad to hear it, Miss Rose. Silvercreek's a good place, once you give it a chance." Eleanor watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. For the first time since arriving in this dusty frontier town, she wondered if perhaps she had found not just a hiding place, but somewhere she might eventually belong. The next morning, Eleanor awoke to the sound of church bells. Though she had declined Hayes's dinner invitation, his words echoed in her mind. "Silvercreek's a good place, once you give it a chance." Perhaps it was time to test that theory. She dressed in her best skirt and shirtwaist navy blue with tiny pearl buttons and pinned her hair in a simple but elegant knot. Mrs. Peters looked pleasantly surprised when Eleanor appeared downstairs. "Well now, don't you look lovely?" the widow said. "Joining us for service today?" Eleanor nodded. "I thought it might be time to meet more people." Mrs. Peters's knowing smile suggested she might have noticed Hayes Morgan's interest, but she mercifully said nothing on the subject. The small white church was nearly full when they arrived, but Mrs. Peters led Eleanor to a pew near the middle. As they settled in, Eleanor couldn't help scanning the congregation. She spotted Hayes and Thomas in a pew across the aisle, the boy fidgeting with his collar while his father spoke with an elderly couple seated behind them. As if sensing her gaze, Hayes looked up. Their eyes met across the church, and he offered a small nod of greeting. Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. The service was simpler than what she'd grown accustomed to in Philadelphia, but there was an earnestness to it that touched something in Eleanor. The pastor spoke of community and belonging, of finding one's place in God's plan. words that seemed meant especially for her. After the service, people lingered on the church steps, exchanging news and pleasantries. Eleanor stood slightly apart, already regretting her decision to attend when she felt a gentle tug on her skirt. "Miss Rose," Thomas's face beamed up at her. "Are you coming for dinner? Pa makes the best roast on Sundays." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Hayes appeared behind his son. "Tommy, remember your manners. Miss Rose might have other plans." "Actually," Eleanor found herself saying, "I believe my schedule is unexpectedly clear today." Hayes's surprise quickly gave way to a warm smile. "Well then, we'd be honored to have you join us. Our place isn't fancy, but the food's honest." "I'm sure it will be lovely," Eleanor replied, ignoring Mrs. Peters's barely concealed look of delight. The Broken Spur Ranch lay 3 miles outside town, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, barn, and bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands Hayes employed. As they approached in Hayes's wagon, Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. What was she doing, venturing alone to a man's home, no matter how respectable he seemed? As if sensing her unease, Hayes kept the conversation light, pointing out landmarks and sharing brief stories about the area's history. Thomas, seated between them, chattered excitedly about school projects and ranch activities. "And Pa's teaching me to break horses," the boy announced proudly. "Says I've got a natural seat." "When you're older," Hayes corrected. "Right now, you're learning to ride the ones already broken." The ranch house surprised Eleanor with its warmth. Though simply furnished, care had been taken to make it a home. Handmade quilts draped the backs of chairs, and bookshelves lined one wall of the main room. A woman in her 50s bustled out of the kitchen as they entered. "Miss Rose, this is Mrs. Abernathy," Hayes introduced. "She helps out around the house and keeps Tommy and me from living like complete savages." "Don't you believe a word," the housekeeper said cheerfully. "These two manage just fine, though it's nice to have another female face around the place." She gave Eleanor an appraising look. "Dinner's almost ready. Tommy, come help me set the table." As the boy followed Mrs. Abernathy into the kitchen, Eleanor found herself alone with Hayes for the first time. She moved toward the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. "You enjoy reading," she observed, noting titles ranging from agricultural manuals to Shakespeare. "Life gets quiet out here in winter," Hayes replied, standing beside her. "Books keep the mind sharp." He pulled a volume from the shelf. This was Miriam's favorite, my wife. She used to read poetry aloud in the evenings. Eleanor accepted the book of Tennyson's poems, handling it with care. "You must miss her very much." "Every day," Hayes said simply. "But time has a way of changing grief. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of you rather than consuming you." He looked at Eleanor with those penetrating gray eyes. "I suspect you know something about that, Miss Rose." Eleanor tensed, returning the book to its place. "Mr. Morgan, Hayes," he corrected gently. "Hayes," she conceded. "I appreciate your kindness, but my past is not a subject I wish to discuss." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But should you ever change your mind, I'm a good listener." Dinner was a surprisingly lively affair. Thomas kept the conversation flowing with school anecdotes, and Mrs. Abernathy's roast was indeed excellent. Hayes spoke about the challenges of the coming winter, the need to prepare the herd for the cold months ahead. "We'll be driving some cattle to Denver next week," he explained. "Best prices before winter sets in." "Will you be gone long?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her interest. 4, maybe 5 days if the weather holds." Hayes glanced at Thomas. "Tommy will stay with the Wilsons in town. Sarah's folks," he added with a knowing smile that made the boy blush furiously. After dinner, Thomas asked permission to show Eleanor the new foal born just the previous week. As they walked to the barn, the boy chattering excitedly, Eleanor felt Hayes's gaze following them. There was something both unsettling and comforting about his attention, like being seen, truly seen for the first time in months. The foal was a spindly-legged creature with a white star on its forehead. It nuzzled Thomas's palm eagerly, already accustomed to human touch. "Pa says she'll make a fine cutting horse one day," Thomas said proudly. "Maybe even good enough for me to compete in the county fair next year." "She's beautiful," Eleanor agreed. "Have you named her?" "Thinking on calling her Star, for the mark," Thomas said, scratching the foal's ears. "Pa says a name should mean something." "Your father seems very wise," Eleanor observed. Thomas nodded solemnly. He's the best man I know. Everyone says so. He looked up at Eleanor with those clear gray eyes, so like his father's. He gets sad sometimes, though, when he thinks I'm not looking. The frank admission caught Eleanor off guard. I'm sure he misses your mother, she said gently. It's not just that, Thomas replied with a child's perception. Pa's lonely. The hands have each other, and I have school friends, but Pa, he's always taking care of everyone else. Eleanor didn't know how to respond to the boy's astute observation. Before she could formulate a reply, Hayes appeared at the barn door. Tommy, Mrs. Abernathy's got apple pie cooling. Best claim your slice before I eat it all. With a whoop, Thomas dashed past his father and back toward the house, leaving the adults alone in the golden glow of the afternoon sun slanting through the barn windows. He's quite taken with you, Hayes said, approaching to stroke the foal's neck. He's a remarkable boy, Eleanor replied honestly. You should be very proud. I am. Every day. Hayes looked at her directly. Thank you for coming today. It's been good to have another voice at the table. The simplicity of his gratitude touched Eleanor deeply. I've enjoyed it more than I expected to, she admitted. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, a possibility, fragile as morning frost. But the moment passed when one of the ranch hands called for Hayes from outside. Duty calls, he said with a rueful smile. Let me take you back to the house. As they walked side by side toward the setting sun, Eleanor realized that for a few precious hours, she had forgotten to be afraid, forgotten to be a stranger in a strange land. Somehow, in this place she'd chosen at random, she'd found a moment's peace in the company of this quiet, steadfast man and his earnest son. Back in her room at the boarding house that evening, Eleanor removed her hairpins and brushed out her long auburn hair. Her reflection in the small mirror revealed flushed cheeks and bright eyes she hardly recognized. For the first time in months, she looked alive. The realization brought both joy and terror. To feel again was dangerous. To hope, even more so. She had come to Silvercreek to disappear, not to be found. And yet, Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to the drawer where she kept her most guarded possession, a small silver locket containing a faded photograph. Tonight, she left the drawer closed. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed, at least for now. The following week passed in a blur of activity at the mercantile. Fall shipments arrived, requiring inventory and careful accounting. Eleanor welcomed the distraction, though she found her thoughts drifting frequently to the Broken Spur Ranch and its inhabitants. Hayes had stopped by briefly on Monday to collect supplies for his cattle drive, but they'd had little opportunity to speak privately. On Thursday afternoon, the mercantile door flew open with such force that the bell nearly tore from its moorings. Thomas Morgan stood in the doorway, his face pale with urgency. Miss Rose, come quick, it's Mrs. Abernathy. Eleanor was around the counter in an instant. What's happened? She fell off the porch steps. Her legs all twisted, and she can't move. Dr. Simmons is out at the Miller place delivering a baby. Pa's not back yet, and I didn't know who else to ask. Mr. Grant. Eleanor called over her shoulder, already reaching for her coat. I need to go. The older man waved her on. Go. Take whatever time you need. Thomas had ridden to town on a sturdy pony, but Eleanor hadn't been on a horse in years. Seeing her hesitation, Mr. Grant called to a young man loading supplies nearby. Sam, hitch up my buggy for Miss Rose, quick now. The ride to the ranch seemed interminable, though Thomas assured her it would be faster than waiting for the doctor to return. When they finally arrived, they found Mrs. Abernathy lying on the porch, her face gray with pain. Oh, thank heavens, the housekeeper gasped. I told the boy not to trouble anyone. But nonsense, Eleanor said firmly, kneeling beside the older woman. Let me see. The leg was indeed broken, the ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. Eleanor had assisted at enough charity hospital visits in Philadelphia to recognize the severity of the injury. Thomas, I need clean cloths, 2 straight pieces of wood for splints, and any whiskey your father might have. The boy darted off while Eleanor spoke soothingly to Mrs. Abernathy, assessing her overall condition. By the time Thomas returned with the requested items, Eleanor had formulated a plan. We need to set the bone before we move you, she explained, pouring a generous measure of whiskey. This will help with the pain. Mrs. Abernathy grimaced, but drank. Always knew there was more to you than fancy handwriting, she muttered. Eleanor fashioned a crude but effective splint, working quickly and efficiently despite Mrs. Abernathy's muffled cries. When the job was done, she and Thomas managed to help the housekeeper into the house and onto a sofa. The doctor will need to check this properly, Eleanor warned. But this should keep the bone stable until then. You've done this before, Mrs. Abernathy observed, her shrewd eyes studying Eleanor despite her pain. I've had some experience with injuries, Eleanor admitted carefully. Thomas looked at her with newfound respect. That was amazing, Miss Rose. Wait till Pa hears about this. The mention of Hayes sent an unexpected flutter through Eleanor's chest. Speaking of your father, when is he due back? Tomorrow or the next day, Thomas said. Depends on the trail. Eleanor looked from the boy to the injured housekeeper. Then we have a problem. Mrs. Abernathy can't be left alone, and you're too young to manage everything by yourself. I can manage fine, Thomas protested, though his worried expression betrayed his uncertainty. I'm sure you can, Eleanor said gently. But Mrs. Abernathy needs someone to help her move about, prepare meals, and such. I think. She took a deep breath, already questioning her own judgment. I think I should stay until your father returns. Mrs. Abernathy raised her eyebrows. That would cause talk in town, Miss Rose. A single woman staying at a widower's ranch. Let them talk, Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. I won't leave a child and an injured woman alone when I can help. Thomas, can you ride back to town and explain to Mr. Grant? And ask Mrs. Peters to pack a few things for me. The boy nodded eagerly, clearly relieved. Yes, madam. Right away. After Thomas departed, Mrs. Abernathy fixed Eleanor with a penetrating stare. You're taking quite a risk for people you barely know, Miss Rose. Eleanor busied herself arranging a pillow behind the older woman's head. It's the right thing to do. Maybe so, Mrs. Abernathy agreed. But I suspect there's more to it than simple Christian charity. When Eleanor didn't respond, she continued, Hayes Morgan is a good man. Best I've known. Lost his wife and kept going for that boy's sake. Never complained, never faltered. I'm not, Eleanor began, but Mrs. Abernathy waved her protest away. I've seen how he looks at you, girl. And how you look at him when you think no one notices. Her expression softened. Whatever you're running from, and don't bother denying it, you've found good people here. Sometimes that's all the Lord asks of us, to recognize the good when we find it. Eleanor turned away, unable to meet the knowing gaze. I'll make us some tea, she said, retreating to the kitchen. That evening, after settling Mrs. Abernathy for the night and ensuring Thomas was safely in bed, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, gazing at the vast canopy of stars above. The night was cool but not cold, the silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pastures. It felt strangely right, being here. As if somehow, in this place she'd never intended to stay, she'd found a momentary respite from the fear that had driven her across the country. But Eleanor knew better than to trust such feelings. Peace was fleeting, safety an illusion. The past always found a way to resurface, no matter how far one ran. She closed her eyes, remembering the telegram that had arrived that fateful morning in Philadelphia. He's been released. Get out now. For months later, she still woke sometimes in the dark, certain she heard footsteps outside her door. A sound from the yard brought Eleanor back to the present hoofbeats, approaching rapidly. Her heart stuttered with alarm. No one should be arriving at this hour. She retreated into the house, closing and bolting the door. Through the window, she watched as a rider dismounted, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight. Tommy? Mrs. Abernathy. The familiar voice flooded Eleanor with relief. Hayes. She unbolted the door and opened it to find him on the porch, hat in hand, concern etched across his features. At the sight of her, he froze. Eleanor? What are you? His eyes widened with alarm. Is Tommy all right? Thomas is fine, she assured him quickly. He's asleep. It's Mrs. Abernathy. She fell and broke her leg this afternoon. Thomas came to town for help. Hayes's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank God. When I saw the light and you at the door instead of Mrs. Abernathy. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from the ride, and his hat. I rode ahead when we made better time than expected. The hands are following with the herd. They'll be here by morning. Come in. Eleanor stepped aside. You must be exhausted. In the lamplight of the main room, she could see the fatigue lining his face, the dust of the trail on his clothes. Without thinking, she moved to the kitchen and poured him a cup of coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the stove. Mrs. Abernathy's resting comfortably, she explained, handing him the cup. I splinted her leg and gave her laudanum for the pain. Dr. Simmons should check her properly tomorrow. Hayes studied her over the rim of his cup. You seem to know a great deal about treating injuries. Eleanor tensed, realizing she'd revealed more of herself than intended. I volunteered at a charity hospital in Philadelphia, she admitted. Before I came west. Hayes nodded, accepting this small offering of truth without pressing for more. Thank you for staying with them. I don't like to think what might have happened if you hadn't been here. Thomas is quite resourceful, Eleanor said with a small smile. He would have managed somehow. Still, it was a kindness I won't forget. Hayes set down his cup and stepped closer. In the quiet house, with only the tick of the clock and the distant cry of a coyote, they stood face to face, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, smell the leather and horses and open air that clung to him. I should go, she said softly. Now that you're home. It's the middle of the night, Hayes pointed out. At least stay until morning. When she hesitated, he added, Mrs. Abernathy would never forgive me if I sent you off alone in the dark. Eleanor knew she should insist, maintain the propriety that was her shield. But exhaustion and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name, made her nod in agreement. I'll take the chair in Mrs. Abernathy's room, she said, in case she needs anything in the night. Hayes looked like he wanted to say more, but simply nodded. I'll check on Tommy and then clean up. It's good to see you, Eleanor, even under these circumstances. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice low and serious. Whatever brought you to Silvercreek, whatever you're running from, you're safe here. I want you to know that. Eleanor froze, her back to him, unable to turn and face the intensity she knew she would find in his gaze. Good night, Hayes, she whispered, and fled to the safety of Mrs. Abernathy's room. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Hayes's words echoed in her thoughts. You're safe here. How desperately she wanted to believe that. But safety was a luxury she'd learned not to trust. Dawn was breaking when she finally dozed off in the chair beside Mrs. Abernathy's bed. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the sound of voices in the kitchen. Checking that the housekeeper was still sleeping, Eleanor smoothed her rumpled skirt and went to investigate. Hayes stood at the stove, competently turning strips of bacon while Thomas set the table. Both looked up as she entered, and the domestic scene struck her with unexpected force, this glimpse of their daily life, the routine father and son had established in their womanless household. Morning, Miss Rose, Thomas greeted cheerfully. Pa's making breakfast since you took care of us yesterday. I'm afraid my cooking doesn't compare to Mrs. Abernathy's, Hayes said with a self-deprecating smile. But we won't starve. It smells wonderful, Eleanor replied truthfully. She moved to help Thomas with the table, falling easily into the morning rhythm of the household. By mid-morning, Dr. Simmons had visited, confirming Eleanor's assessment and treatment of Mrs. Abernathy's leg. He reset the splint with more professional materials, but complimented Eleanor's initial work. Might have saved her from a much worse outcome, the doctor told Hayes as they stood on the porch. Your Miss Rose has steady hands and a cool head. Hayes didn't correct the possessive phrase, and Eleanor, overhearing from the doorway, felt a curious warmth spread through her chest at his silence. With the doctor gone and Mrs. Abernathy settled, it was time for Eleanor to return to town. Hayes insisted on driving her himself, despite having been awake most of the night. Thomas can look after Mrs. Abernathy for an hour, he said, helping Eleanor into the wagon. She's mostly sleeping now anyway. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the autumn landscape rolling past in shades of gold and russet. Finally, Hayes spoke. I'd like to call on you properly, Eleanor, if you'd permit it. The directness of his request caught her off guard. Hayes, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. And if your answer is no, I'll respect that. But after these past weeks, after finding you in my home, caring for my family, I'd be a fool not to acknowledge what I'm feeling. Eleanor stared at her gloved hands, twisted tightly in her lap. What exactly are you feeling? Hayes guided the horses around a bend before answering. That you're the most intriguing woman I've met since Miriam died. That Tommy lights up when you're around in a way I haven't seen in years. That despite your best efforts to remain a stranger, you belong here more than you realize. His words pierced straight to her heart, to the longing she'd tried so hard to suppress. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough, Hayes replied steadily. I know you're educated and kind. I know you're brave enough to start over alone in a strange place. I know you have secrets that still hurt you. He glanced at her, his gaze unwavering. The rest, I'd like the chance to discover. They were approaching town now, the steeple of the church visible in the distance. Eleanor knew she should refuse him outright, maintain the walls that had kept her safe these past months. But something in her rebelled against the loneliness she'd accepted as her fate. Sunday, she said finally. You could call on me Sunday afternoon. Hayes's smile transformed his face, erasing the fatigue and worry of the previous night. Sunday it is. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. Thank you again, for everything. Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. As she turned to go inside, Hayes called after her. Miss Rose? Perhaps you might consider staying in Silvercreek. For good, I mean. Seems to me you've found a place here. The hope in his voice followed her inside, warming her despite the autumn chill. Mrs. Peters, of course, had many questions about Eleanor's overnight stay at the Morgan Ranch. Eleanor provided the barest details, emphasizing Mrs. Abernathy's injury and the necessity of her presence. Well, it was a Christian act, I'm sure, the widow said, her tone suggesting she suspected more worldly motivations. And Mr. Morgan drove you home himself, did he? He was very grateful for the assistance. Eleanor replied neutrally, escaping to her room as quickly as politeness allowed. Alone at last, Eleanor sank onto her bed, emotions warring within her. Hayes's words had awakened something she'd thought long dead: hope, possibility, a future beyond mere survival. But with that hope came terror. Eleanor crossed to the small desk and unlocked the drawer where she kept her most precious and dangerous possession. The silver locket gleamed in the afternoon light, a simple oval with an intricate filigree pattern. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman with Eleanor's same auburn hair and a baby in her arms. Her mother, murdered when Eleanor was just 17, while she cowered in a closet, helpless to intervene. The man responsible, her mother's second husband, Eleanor's stepfather, had been sentenced to 7 years for manslaughter, a term that had ended 4 months ago. Eleanor had testified at the trial, her voice shaking but determined as she recounted the years of abuse, the threats, the violence that had finally culminated in her mother's death. William Barrett had stared at her throughout her testimony, his eyes promising retribution. I'll find you, he'd mouthed as they led him away. Wherever you go. The telegram from her mother's friend, who still had connections in the police department, had sent Eleanor fleeing in the night. Philadelphia to Pittsburgh to Chicago to Denver to Silvercreek, each step taking her further from her past, but never quite far enough to outrun the fear. How could she entangle Hayes and Thomas in that danger? How could she risk bringing violence into their peaceful lives? And yet, as Eleanor closed the locket and returned it to its hiding place, she realized the thought of leaving Silvercreek, of never seeing Hayes's steady gaze or Thomas's bright smile again, caused an ache so profound it took her breath away. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if summer had returned briefly to defy the approaching winter. Eleanor dressed with particular care, selecting a sage green skirt and cream shirtwaist that complemented her auburn hair. Mrs. Peters noticed her attention to appearance, but, mercifully, limited herself to a knowing smile. Hayes arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his best vest. He carried a small bouquet of late wildflowers and autumn leaves, arranged with surprising artistry. Thomas helped, he admitted, presenting them to Eleanor with a self-deprecating smile. Said no lady wants just flowers that are half dead already. They're lovely, Eleanor said sincerely, taking the bouquet. Please thank him for me. They walked through town toward the river, drawing curious glances from Sunday strollers. Eleanor was acutely aware of the gossip they were generating but found, to her surprise, that she minded less than expected. How is Mrs. Abernathy? she asked as they followed the path along the riverbank. Cranky as a wet hen, Hayes replied with a chuckle. Hates being idle. But the doctor says she's healing well, thanks to your quick action. And Thomas? Is he managing with the extra responsibilities? Better than I'd have expected. He's growing up fast. Hayes glanced at her. He asks about you. Wanted to know if you'd come back to visit soon. Eleanor's heart contracted at the thought of the earnest boy. I'd like that, she said softly. They found a bench overlooking the river, its surface dappled with golden light. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching a pair of ducks navigate the current. I used to bring Tommy here when he was small, Hayes said eventually. After Miriam died, he'd throw stones in the water for hours. Something about the splash seemed to comfort him. Eleanor could picture it clearly, the grieving man and his young son, finding solace in the simple, eternal flow of the river. Children are remarkably resilient, she observed. More than adults, sometimes, Hayes agreed. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Eleanor, before this goes any further, there's something I need to say. She tensed, preparing herself for questions about her past that she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, Hayes continued, I know you value your privacy, and I respect that. Whatever brought you to Silvercreek is your business, and I won't press you to share it until you're ready, if ever. But I need you to know that my interest in you is genuine, not merely curiosity about your secrets. His honesty disarmed her. That's uncommonly understanding. Hayes smiled slightly. I've learned that people reveal themselves in their actions more than their words. And your actions have shown me the kind of person you are. He hesitated, then added, when Miriam died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to feel this way about another woman. The naked vulnerability in his admission touched Eleanor deeply. I never expected to feel anything at all again, she whispered, offering her own truth in return. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared wounds, of possibilities neither had dared imagine. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Hayes reached for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her gloved fingers, the touch both gentle and steadying. I'm not asking for promises, Eleanor. Just a chance to see where this might lead. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings that she was endangering him, that her past would eventually catch up with her, that she had no right to drag him and Thomas into her nightmare. But for once, Eleanor silenced those fears and listened instead to the voice of her heart. I'd like that, she said simply. Hayes's smile warmed her more than the autumn sunshine. They sat together by the river until the light began to fade, talking of simple things, his plans for the ranch, books they had both read, Thomas's progress in school. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, this careful beginning. As Hayes walked her back to the boarding house in the gathering twilight, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. The future remained uncertain, the past still a shadow at her heels, but for this moment, at least, she allowed herself to hope. At the boarding house steps, Hayes took her hand again. May I call on you next Sunday as well? Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. And perhaps, he added tentatively, you might join us for dinner at the ranch one evening this week? Tommy would be delighted, and Mrs. Abernathy is eager to see you again. I'd like that very much, Eleanor replied. Hayes hesitated, then leaned forward and brushed his lips against her cheek, the contact so brief she might have imagined it. Until then, Miss Rose, he murmured, and turned to go. Eleanor watched him walk away, her fingertips touching the spot where his lips had been. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the future seemed to hold more promise than dread. Over the following weeks, a delicate courtship blossomed between Eleanor and Hayes. Sunday afternoons became their tradition, walks along the river, picnics in the meadow when weather permitted, quiet conversations by the fire at the ranch when it didn't. Eleanor found herself opening up about her childhood in Philadelphia, her love of books, her dreams of perhaps one day teaching careful omissions that nonetheless felt like truth. Hayes, in turn, spoke of his life before Silvercreek, his youth in Boston, his decision to seek his fortune in the West, the chance meeting with Miriam that had changed the course of his life. He spoke of her freely, without bitterness or excessive sentimentality, just the honest recollections of a man who had loved deeply and lost tragically. As November turned to December, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn into the life of the Morgan family. She helped Thomas with his arithmetic, played checkers with Mrs. Abernathy as the housekeeper recuperated, and even learned to make Hayes's favorite apple pie under the older woman's exacting tutelage. The town, of course, noticed. Eleanor caught the speculative glances, heard the whispers that sometimes fell silent as she approached. But strangely, they bothered her less than she would have expected. Something about Hayes's steadfast presence made outside opinions seem less important. One crisp December evening, as they sat before the fire at the ranch, Thomas having been sent to bed and Mrs. Abernathy retired for the night, Hayes took Eleanor's hand. "Christmas is coming," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'd like you to spend it with us, here at the ranch." Eleanor hesitated. Christmas had been painful since her mother's death, a day she typically spent alone with her memories. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your family tradition." "You wouldn't be intruding," Hayes said softly. "You'd be enhancing it." He met her gaze directly. "Eleanor, these past weeks, having you here, seeing you with Tommy, watching you become part of our lives, it's been a gift I never expected." The raw emotion in his voice stirred answering feelings in Eleanor's heart. Before she could respond, Hayes continued, "I know it's soon. I know you have reservations about Silvercreek, about us, about whatever lies in your past. But I need you to know how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Rose. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. The words she'd both longed for and dreaded hung between them, demanding a response she wasn't sure she was brave enough to give. "Hayes, she faltered, torn between the truth of her own feelings and the fear that still shadowed her. "There are things you don't know about me, things that might change how you feel." "Nothing could change how I feel," he insisted, his grip on her hand tightening. "Whatever it is, Eleanor, we can face it together." The certainty in his voice nearly undid her. How desperately she wanted to believe him, to trust that his love could withstand the darkness of her past, the danger that might still be pursuing her. "I need time," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please understand. It's not that I don't care for you. I do, more than I ever thought possible. But there are complications, and Hayes silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "Time is something I can give you," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." Relief and gratitude flooded through her. "Thank you," she said simply, leaning forward to rest her forehead against his shoulder. Hayes's arms came around her, strong and protective, and for a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future where such embraces were her daily comfort. They remained that way until the fire burned low, wrapped in a silence more eloquent than words. The week before Christmas brought the first heavy snow of the season, transforming Silvercreek into a landscape of crystalline beauty. Eleanor, walking home from the mercantile one evening, paused to admire the way the setting sun turned the snowy street to gold. For a moment, the beauty of it overwhelmed her, this place that had become home when she least expected it. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Didn't see the man with familiar cold eyes tracking her movements, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. William Barrett had found her at last. Eleanor was awakened the next morning by an urgent knocking at her door. Mrs. Peters stood in the hallway, her face pale with concern. "There's a man downstairs asking for you, dear. Says he's your uncle. Come all the way from Philadelphia to find you." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "My uncle?" Mrs. Peters nodded. "A Mr. Barrett. Said it was urgent family business." The landlady's expression grew troubled. "Eleanor, dear, he seems. I'm not entirely comfortable with him. If you'd prefer, I can tell him you're not receiving visitors." Eleanor's mind raced. He was here, in Silvercreek. Her worst fear realized. But perhaps it was better this way, to face him directly rather than continue looking over her shoulder. "Thank you, Mrs. Peters," she managed. "Would you tell him I'll be down shortly? And could you possibly send word to Hayes Morgan? Ask him to come as soon as he can." The older woman nodded, clearly relieved that Eleanor wasn't facing this alone. "Of course, dear. Right away." Hands trembling, Eleanor dressed quickly in a simple blue skirt and white shirtwaist. She opened the drawer and took out the silver locket, clasping it around her neck for the first time since arriving in Silvercreek. It felt like armor, a reminder of why she had run and why she could run no more. William Barrett sat in Mrs. Peters's parlor, looking deceptively respectable in a dark suit and neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, cold and calculating as Eleanor remembered, fixed on her as she entered. "Eleanor." He rose, a smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his face. "My dear niece. How worried we've all been." "I am not your niece," Eleanor said quietly, remaining near the door. "And no one has been worried, because no one is left to care." Barrett's smile tightened. "Now, that's not very welcoming after I've traveled so far to find you." His gaze hardened. "You've led me on quite a chase, girl. Very inconsiderate, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done?" Eleanor's voice shook with sudden anger. "You murdered my mother. You destroyed our family. You threatened my life." "Unfortunate misunderstandings," Barrett said smoothly. "I served my time for what happened to your mother. A regrettable tragedy, but hardly murder. As for threats, well, grief makes people say terrible things they don't mean." Mrs. Peters appeared in the doorway, her expression making it clear she'd overheard enough to understand the situation. "The message has been sent," she said pointedly to Eleanor. "Help should arrive shortly." Barrett's eyes narrowed. "Help? Are we expecting company?" "My fiancé," Eleanor improvised, drawing strength from the lie that felt strangely like truth. "He'll be here soon." "How convenient," Barrett sneered. "Found yourself a protector, have you? Well, that needn't complicate matters. I've simply come to discuss your inheritance." Eleanor stared at him in confusion. "Inheritance? There is nothing to inherit. You spent every penny my mother had." "Not quite everything." Barrett leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Your mother had a safety deposit box at the Philadelphia Bank and Trust. Contents unknown, but the key was among her personal effects. Effects that rightfully belonged to me, as her husband." Understanding dawned. "You think she left something valuable. That's why you've been hunting me. You think I have the key. Do you deny it?" Barrett's veneer of civility was cracking. "You were always her favorite, always in her confidence. Where else would she have hidden it?" Eleanor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I have nothing of yours. Nothing at all. You've wasted your journey." Barrett's expression darkened. "I don't believe you." He glanced toward the window, clearly calculating how much time before this mysterious fiancé arrived. "We can do this pleasantly or not, Eleanor. Your choice. But I will have what I came for." He took a step toward her, and Eleanor instinctively backed away. Mrs. Peters moved to stand beside her, a frail but determined ally. "You'll not threaten anyone in my house, sir," the widow declared. "I suggest you leave before the sheriff is involved." Barrett's hand moved to his jacket pocket, and Eleanor's heart froze. She remembered all too well his tendency to carry a small revolver. But before he could make another move, the front door burst open. Hayes Morgan filled the doorway, his imposing frame tense with barely contained fury. Behind him stood Sheriff Collins, hand resting on his holstered gun. "Eleanor." Hayes moved immediately to her side, his eyes quickly assessing that she was unharmed before turning his attention to Barrett. "This the man?" She nodded, relief making her light-headed. "My stepfather, William Barrett." Hayes's jaw tightened at the confirmation. "Mr. Barrett," he said, his voice dangerously controlled. "I believe your visit is concluded." Barrett looked from Hayes to the sheriff, clearly reassessing his options. "This is a family matter," he insisted. "A misunderstanding, nothing more." "Funny," the sheriff drawled. "Mrs. Peters's boy said something about murder accusations being tossed around. Sounds a mite more serious than a misunderstanding." Barrett's face hardened. "The girl is confused. Imagining things. I served my time for an accidental death manslaughter, not murder. And I have every right to speak with my stepdaughter about family business." "Not in my town." "You don't," Sheriff Collins replied. "Not when the lady clearly doesn't welcome your company." He gestured toward the door. "I'll escort you to the hotel. You can take the morning train back east." "This isn't finished," Barrett hissed, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. "What's hers is mine by right. I'll have it, one way or another." Hayes stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and her stepfather. "Sir, I suggest you go quietly with the sheriff. Because if you make one more threat against Miss Rose, I won't be responsible for my actions." Something in Hayes's voice, the absolute certainty of his intent, seemed to finally penetrate Barrett's arrogance. With a last venomous glare at Eleanor, he allowed the sheriff to lead him from the house. The moment he was gone, Eleanor's knees gave way. Hayes caught her, guiding her gently to a chair. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, kneeling before her. Eleanor shook her head, tears finally breaking free. "He found me," she whispered. "After everything, he found me. He won't touch you," Hayes promised fiercely. "Not while I'm alive." Mrs. Peters quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the parlor. Hayes took Eleanor's hands in his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "Eleanor, please," he said softly. "Tell me everything now. Let me help you." And so, at last, Eleanor told him the whole terrible story: her mother's ill-fated second marriage to William Barrett, the years of escalating abuse, the night she hid in the closet and watched through the slats as her stepfather's rage turned deadly, the trial, her testimony, the whispered threats as Barrett was led away to serve his sentence. "I had a friend in Philadelphia, my mother's friend, who worked for a lawyer connected to the police department," Eleanor explained. "She sent me a telegram when he was released. Warned me that he was looking for me, talking about something valuable my mother had hidden. But there was nothing." Hayes asked. Eleanor touched the locket at her throat. "Only this. It was my grandmother's, then my mother's. It's not valuable except sentimentally." She opened it, showing him the faded photograph inside. "This is all I have left of her." Hayes studied the image, then looked up at Eleanor with such tenderness that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. "You have her smile," he said gently. The simple observation, this connection between her past and present, undid Eleanor completely. She fell forward into Hayes's embrace, sobbing as she hadn't allowed herself to in years. He held her tightly, his strength a bulwark against the storm of her grief and fear. When her tears finally subsided, Hayes helped her to her feet. "Pack your things," he said decisively. "You're coming to the ranch. Barrett won't get near you there." Eleanor hesitated. "Hayes, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm insisting." His expression softened. "Eleanor, don't you understand yet? There's nothing I wouldn't do to keep you safe." The simple, profound truth of his declaration silenced her objections. Within the hour, Eleanor had gathered her belongings and was in Hayes's wagon, heading toward the safety of the Broken Spur Ranch. Thomas was waiting anxiously on the porch when they arrived, having been briefly told that Eleanor needed their help. The boy's face lit up at the sight of her, though concern quickly followed. "Are you all right, Miss Rose? Pa said a bad man was after you." "I'm fine now, Thomas," Eleanor assured him, touched by his concern. "Your father is taking very good care of me." Mrs. Abernathy, moving slowly but steadily with a cane, emerged from the house to welcome her. "About time you stopped being stubborn and came to stay with folks who care about you," the housekeeper declared, her gruff tone belying the warmth in her eyes. "Your room's been ready for weeks." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "My room?" Hayes looked slightly embarrassed. "I might have hoped. That is, we've all been hoping you'd consider staying, even before today's events." The realization that they had been preparing for her, making space for her in their home and lives, overwhelmed Eleanor with emotion. This wasn't merely refuge from danger, it was an invitation to belong. As she settled into the small but comfortable bedroom that night, Eleanor felt both profound gratitude and lingering fear. Barrett would not give up easily. Whatever he believed her mother had hidden, his obsession would drive him to desperate measures. A soft knock at her door roused her from troubled thoughts. Hayes stood in the hallway, a mug of something steaming in his hands. "Mrs. Abernathy's special tea," he explained, offering it to her. "Claims it cures everything from broken hearts to broken bones." Eleanor accepted the mug with a small smile. "Thank you." Hayes hesitated. "Sheriff Collins stopped by while you were getting settled." Barrett checked out of the hotel. Eleanor's hands tightened around the warm mug. "He's gone. For now. Collins put him on the afternoon train himself." Hayes's expression was troubled. "But I don't think we've seen the last of him." "No," Eleanor agreed quietly. "He's not a man who gives up easily. Neither am I." Hayes met her gaze steadily. "I meant what I said, Eleanor. He won't touch you. Not while I'm alive to prevent it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both warmed and worried her. "I can't bear the thought of bringing danger to you and Thomas. Perhaps I should move on." lead Barrett away from here. Is that what you want? Hayes asked, his voice carefully neutral. To leave Silvercreek? To leave us? Eleanor looked up at him. This man who had somehow become the center of her world in such a short time. No, she whispered. That's the last thing I want. Hayes's shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. Because Tommy would never forgive me if I let you go. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. And I'm not sure I'd forgive myself either. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Try to rest, Eleanor. You're safe here. I promise. As he turned to go, Eleanor caught his hand. Hayes. She took a deep breath, knowing she might never find more courage than this moment offered. When you told me how you felt, by the fire that night. I didn't give you a proper answer. Hayes went very still. You don't owe me an answer, Eleanor. Especially not now, with everything that's happened. But I want to give you one. She rose to face him, setting aside the mug. I've spent so long being afraid, so long running from the past, that I nearly missed the future standing right in front of me. Her voice trembled but held firm. I love you, Hayes Morgan. I think perhaps I have since that first day in the mercantile, though I was too frightened to admit it even to myself. Hayes's face transformed with such joy that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. He drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. Say it again, he murmured against her hair. I love you, Eleanor repeated, the words easier the second time, as if her heart had simply been waiting for permission to speak its truth. I love you, and Thomas, in this life we might build together. If you still want that. Hayes pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Want it? Eleanor, it's all I've dreamed of these past months. His hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. I love you. With everything I am, I love you. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, like every step of her journey, even the painful ones, had been leading her precisely here, to this man, this moment, this profound connection that transcended fear and loss. They stood together in the quiet hallway, foreheads touching, sharing breath and heartbeats, until Hayes reluctantly stepped away. We should both get some rest, he said, though his eyes suggested rest was the furthest thing from his mind. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do about Barrett. Together. Eleanor nodded, suddenly shy in the aftermath of their declarations. Together, she echoed. As Hayes turned to go, he paused. Eleanor, when this is over, when Barrett is no longer a threat, will you marry me? Be a mother to Tommy, mistress of this house, my partner in everything. The question, so direct, so full of hope, brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. But these were tears of joy, not sorrow. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Hayes's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. He kissed her once more, briefly but with unmistakable promise, before reluctantly departing. Alone in her room, Eleanor touched her lips, still warm from his kiss. For the first time in years, the future seemed not a thing to fear, but a gift to embrace, if only they could overcome the shadow that still loomed over their newfound happiness. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the world outside blanketed in pristine white. Despite the lingering threat of Barrett's return, a festive mood pervaded the ranch house. Thomas was nearly bursting with excitement, both for the holiday and for the news that Eleanor had agreed to marry his father. Does this mean I can call you Ma now? He asked as they decorated the pine tree Hayes had cut from the north pasture. Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion. If you'd like to, she said carefully. Though I would never try to replace your mother. Thomas considered this solemnly. I don't really remember her much, he admitted. Just bits and pieces. Pa says she was real pretty and kind, like you. He looked up at Eleanor with those serious gray eyes. I think she'd be happy I have you now. Eleanor had to blink back tears as she hugged the boy. Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you know. Hayes, watching from the doorway, crossed to join them, placing an arm around each. My family, he said simply, the wonder in his voice reflecting Eleanor's own feelings exactly. For a moment, the shadow of Barrett seemed to recede, pushed back by the bright reality of their love for one another. But as dusk fell and they prepared for the small Christmas Eve gathering Hayes had arranged, Mrs. Abernathy's sister and brother-in-law, the Wilsons from town, and Mr. Grant from the mercantile. Eleanor couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Hayes noticed her distraction as she helped him arrange plates of Mrs. Abernathy's Christmas cookies on the sideboard. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "I'm not sure," Eleanor admitted. "Just a feeling. As if something's watching us." Hayes immediately went to check the windows, drawing the curtains more securely. "The hands are all on alert," he assured her. "No stranger could approach the house without being seen." Eleanor nodded, trying to shake off the foreboding. "You're right. It's just nerves, I'm sure." But Hayes was taking no chances. He disappeared briefly into his study and returned with a small revolver, which he tucked into his belt beneath his jacket. "Just a precaution," he said, seeing Eleanor's alarm. "Now, let's enjoy our Christmas Eve. I refuse to let that man steal one more moment of your happiness." The evening that followed was one Eleanor knew she would treasure always. The small gathering was warm and full of laughter, with mulled cider for the adults and hot chocolate for Thomas and the Wilson children. Mr. Grant brought his fiddle and played carols while they sang around the fire. Mrs. Abernathy, despite her still healing leg, insisted on serving her famous Christmas bread, a sweet loaf studded with dried fruits and nuts. As the hour grew late, their guests began to depart, promising to return for Christmas dinner the following day. The Wilson family was the last to leave, their wagon disappearing down the snowy drive toward town. "Best Christmas Eve in years," Mrs. Abernathy declared as Hayes helped her to her room. "Having you here makes all the difference, Miss Rose." Thomas, drowsy but determined to hang his stocking by the fireplace, hugged Eleanor tightly before Hayes escorted him upstairs to bed. Left alone by the dying fire, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace descend. Whatever happened with Barrett, this night, this perfect Christmas Eve with the family she had found against all odds would remain a cherished memory. Hayes returned to find her gazing into the embers, her expression serene. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her on the sofa. "More than I ever thought possible," Eleanor admitted, leaning against his shoulder. "Thank you, Hayes, for everything." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You've brought life back into this house, Eleanor. Into me." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire's glow. Eventually, Hayes spoke again, his tone reflective. "When Miriam died, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. I had Tommy, of course, and the ranch, but something essential was missing." He took Eleanor's hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "I never expected to find it again. Never expected you." Eleanor turned to face him, her heart full. "Nor I you. After everything that happened with my mother, with Barrett, I had resigned myself to being alone. It felt safer. And now?" Hayes asked, his gaze intent. "Now I know that some risks are worth taking," Eleanor replied, reaching up to touch his face. "That some loves are worth fighting for." Hayes leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments, tender, passionate, filled with understanding and hope. Eleanor wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, the last of her reservations dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. A sharp crack shattered the moment the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. Hayes was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Eleanor and the potential threat. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing the revolver from his belt. "Hayes, no," Eleanor began, but he was already moving cautiously toward the kitchen, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Heart pounding, Eleanor rose and followed, keeping close to the wall. The house had gone eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the silver of moonlight streaming through a now broken window. Hayes stood in the center of the room, revolver ready, scanning the shadows. "Show yourself," he commanded. A low chuckle came from the pantry doorway. "Touching scene," I interrupted, William Barrett said, stepping into the moonlight. "The lonely widower and the runaway stepdaughter. How perfectly romantic." Eleanor's blood ran cold at the sight of him. Barrett held a pistol pointed directly at Hayes's chest, his eyes glittering with malice. "Barrett," Hayes acknowledged calmly, though Eleanor could see the tension in his stance. "You're trespassing on private property." "Hardly my most serious crime," Barrett replied with a shrug. "Step aside, Morgan. My business is with Eleanor." Hayes didn't move. "Any business with Eleanor is business with me." Barrett's expression hardened. "Noble, but foolish." I've killed before, you know. One more won't trouble my conscience. Hayes, please. Eleanor stepped forward, terror making her voice shake. Do as he says. This is between him and me. Listen to the girl, Barrett said. She knows what I'm capable of. So do I, Hayes replied steadily. And I'm still not moving. Barrett's finger tightened on the trigger. Last chance, rancher. Hayes. Eleanor pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I can't lose you too. Please. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hayes slowly lowered his weapon, placing it on the kitchen table. What do you want, Barrett? The key, Barrett said simply. The key to her mother's safety deposit box. I know Eleanor has it. I don't, Eleanor insisted. I've told you there is no key. Barrett's face contorted with rage. Stop lying. Your mother told me about it before she died. Said she'd hidden something valuable where only you would find it. A sudden realization dawned on Eleanor. The locket, she whispered, her hand going to her throat where it still hung. She meant the locket. Barrett's gaze fixed on the silver oval. Give it to me. Now. With trembling fingers, Eleanor unclasped the locket and held it out. Barrett snatched it, keeping his gun trained on Hayes as he examined it one-handed. Open it, he demanded. It's just a photograph, Eleanor said, reaching to show him the catch. As the locket opened, something small fell out not from the visible compartment with the photograph, but from a hidden recess in the back. A tiny key, no bigger than Eleanor's little fingernail, gleamed in the moonlight on the kitchen floor. Barrett's laugh was triumphant as he bent to retrieve it. I knew it. All this time, right around your neck. In that moment of distraction, Hayes moved a sudden, explosive lunge that caught Barrett off guard. The gun discharged with a deafening roar as the men crashed to the floor, struggling for control of the weapon. Eleanor screamed, frozen with terror as the men fought. Barrett, though older, was wiry and driven by desperation. He managed to keep hold of the pistol, bringing it around toward Hayes's head. Without conscious thought, Eleanor grabbed Hayes's discarded revolver from the table and fired. The shot echoed in the confined space of the kitchen. Barrett stiffened, a look of almost comical surprise crossing his face. Then he slumped, the pistol falling from suddenly lifeless fingers. Hayes scrambled away from the body, his face pale in the moonlight. Eleanor. She stood motionless, the revolver still extended, unable to process what had just happened. Eleanor, Hayes repeated, gently taking the weapon from her hands. It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. The reality of it crashed over her all at once. She had killed the man who murdered her mother. Ended the nightmare that had haunted her for years. Protected Hayes as he had protected her. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. Hayes checked briefly. Yes. You saved my life. Eleanor began to tremble, reaction setting in as the adrenaline drained away. Hayes gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he could absorb her shudders into his own body. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you, Eleanor. You're safe now. Truly safe. Footsteps pounded on the stairs as Thomas appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. Pa? Miss Rose? I heard shots, he broke off, seeing the body on the floor. Everything's all right, Tommy, Hayes said quickly, keeping Eleanor wrapped in one arm while extending the other to his son. There was trouble, but it's over now. Go wake Mrs. Abernathy, then ride to the bunkhouse and fetch Mr. Cooper. Tell him to get the sheriff. The boy nodded, his gaze shifting from the body to Eleanor's pale face. Are you hurt, Miss Rose? Eleanor managed a shaky smile. No, Thomas. I'm not hurt. As the boy dashed off to follow his father's instructions, Hayes guided Eleanor to a chair, keeping his arm around her shoulders. It was self-defense, Eleanor. Clear as day. No one will blame you for protecting yourself and me. Eleanor nodded numbly, her gaze falling on the tiny key still clutched in Barrett's dead hand. All this time, she whispered. All this time, she was trying to protect me, and I never knew. Hayes gently retrieved the key, examining it in the moonlight. Any idea what it opens? Eleanor shook her head. The safety deposit box in Philadelphia, I suppose. But what could be so valuable that he'd track me across the country? My mother had nothing when she married him. No savings, no valuables except the locket itself. Perhaps it's not money at all, Hayes suggested. Perhaps it's evidence something that would have increased his sentence if known at the time. The possibility made a certain sense. Eleanor's mother had been a cautious woman, especially in the later years of her marriage when Barrett's true nature had emerged. She might well have kept some record, some proof of his misdeeds, as insurance. "It doesn't matter now," Eleanor said finally. "Whatever secrets that Key protects can stay locked away. He can't hurt anyone else, ever again." Hayes nodded, understanding her need to close this chapter of her life. He pressed the locket and key into her palm, closing her fingers around them. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, Eleanor. Brave enough to start over. Brave enough to love again." Eleanor leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "You gave me something to be brave for." The next hours passed in a blur of explanations and statements as Sheriff Collins and his deputy arrived to remove Barrett's body and document the night's events. As Hayes had predicted, there was no question of charges against Eleanor. Barrett had broken into their home, threatened their lives, and died in the ensuing struggle. Justice, of the frontier variety, had been served. Dawn was breaking by the time the authorities departed, promising to return after Christmas to complete the necessary paperwork. Mrs. Abernathy, showing remarkable fortitude for a woman still recovering from a broken leg, had made coffee and was now dozing in her chair by the fire. Thomas, who had refused to return to bed despite the late hour, finally succumbed to exhaustion on the sofa, wrapped in one of the quilts his mother had made years before. Eleanor and Hayes stood on the porch, watching the pink-gold light spread across the snow-covered landscape. Despite the night's violence and the lingering shock, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, she was truly free of fear, of running, of looking over her shoulder. "Quite a Christmas Eve," Hayes said softly, his arm around her waist. Eleanor laughed quietly, the sound surprising even herself. "Not exactly the peaceful holiday we planned." "We'll have plenty of peaceful holidays ahead," Hayes promised, turning to face her. "If you still want that future we talked about." Eleanor looked up at him, this good, steadfast man who had shown her what love truly meant. "More than ever," she said simply. Hayes's smile was like sunrise. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I was going to wait until tonight Christmas dinner, with everyone gathered. But after everything that's happened, I don't want to wait another moment." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Miriam wore it for our 10 years together. I'd be honored if you would wear it now, as a symbol of our love and the family we'll build together." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, not tears of sorrow or fear this time, but of purest joy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Hayes took her left hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit, as if it had always been meant for her. "Eleanor Rose, will you be my wife? Tommy's mother? The heart of our home." "Yes," Eleanor said through her tears. "With all my heart, yes." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the Christmas sun rose fully above the horizon, bathing the Broken Spur Ranch in golden light. In the house behind them, Thomas stirred on the sofa, and Mrs. Abernathy began humming a Christmas hymn in the kitchen. Eleanor Rose, who had come to Silvercreek a stranger, had found not just safety, but belonging. Not just refuge, but love. The cowboy who had first noticed her at the mercantile, with his steady gaze and quiet strength, had given her the greatest gift of all, a family to call her own. "Merry Christmas, my love," Hayes murmured against her lips. "Merry Christmas," Eleanor replied, her heart too full for more elaborate words. And as they turned to go inside, to wake Thomas and begin their first Christmas as a family, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. No longer a stranger, but home at last. Summer arrived in a blaze of golden light, transforming the Broken Spur Ranch into a paradise of verdant pastures and wildflower-dotted meadows. 6 months had passed since that fateful Christmas Eve, months filled with healing and planning and quiet joy. Eleanor stood on the porch of what was now her home, watching Hayes and Thomas in the corral below as they worked with a spirited young mare. The sight of them together, the man she loved and the boy who had so easily claimed a place in her heart, still filled her with wonder. Their wedding had been a simple affair in early May, when the first wildflowers carpeted the meadows. The entire town had turned out, their initial curiosity about the Eastern woman with the mysterious past having transformed into genuine affection. Eleanor Rose had become Eleanor Morgan, no longer a stranger but a respected member of the community, the schoolteacher's wife, young Thomas's mother, Hayes Morgan's beloved partner. Eleanor touched the wedding band that now accompanied her grandmother's pearl ring. Sometimes she still marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. From a woman in flight, haunted by the past, to this a woman surrounded by love, looking toward the future. The safety deposit box in Philadelphia had indeed contained evidence journals her mother had kept documenting Barrett's abuse, along with photographs of her injuries and a detailed account of his financial misdeeds. Eleanor had decided, after much reflection, to donate the journals to a women's aid society in Denver, hoping her mother's experiences might somehow help others escape similar situations. The past was not forgotten. Eleanor still kept the silver locket with her mother's picture, but it no longer cast a shadow over her days. Instead, she carried forward the lessons of resilience and courage her mother had taught her, now applied to building a life filled with purpose and joy. Below in the corral, Thomas succeeded in getting the young mare to accept the saddle for the first time, earning an approving nod from Hayes. The boy's whoop of triumph carried across the yard, bringing a smile to Eleanor's face. At 12, Thomas was growing rapidly, his lanky frame promising the same impressive height as his father. He had taken to calling Eleanor Ma with increasing frequency, a development that never failed to bring tears to her eyes. They had formed their own special bond, she helping him with his studies, he teaching her to ride properly and showing her the secret places on the ranch where wildflowers bloomed earliest in spring. Hayes glanced up, catching sight of Eleanor on the porch. Even across the distance, she could see his face soften with love. He said something to Thomas, who nodded and continued working with the mare, then made his way up to the house. "Admiring our handiwork?" Hayes asked, climbing the steps to join her. "Always," Eleanor replied, leaning into him as his arms circled her waist. "Thomas has a way with horses, just like his father." Hayes pressed a kiss to her temple. "He's trying to impress you, you know. Wants his new ma to see what a fine horseman he's becoming." "Consider me thoroughly impressed," Eleanor said with a smile. She hesitated, then added, "I have something to tell you." Hayes turned to face her fully, his gray eyes searching hers. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach, still flat beneath her cotton dress. "Everything is perfect," she whispered. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Hayes. Around Christmas." Hayes's expression transformed with such wonder and joy that Eleanor's heart seemed to expand in her chest. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Eleanor, my love." Words failing him, he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious materials on earth. When he drew back, there were tears in his eyes. "Another child," he said softly. "Another blessing I never thought to have again." Eleanor reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that happiness had etched there over the past months. "Are you pleased?" Hayes laughed, the rich sound carrying across the yard and causing Thomas to look up curiously. "Pleased? Eleanor, there aren't words for what I'm feeling." He placed his hand once more against her stomach, protective and reverent. "A new life? Our child. Shall we tell Thomas?" Eleanor asked, her own eyes shimmering with tears of joy. "Right now," Hayes confirmed. He turned toward the corral, calling down to his son. "Tommy, come up to the house. Your mother has news." Thomas secured the mare and bounded up the path, his face flushed with exertion and curiosity. "What news? Is it about the harvest festival? Are we going to Denver after all?" Eleanor laughed, sharing an amused glance with Hayes. "No, nothing like that. It's about our family." She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous about the boy's reaction. "Thomas, your father and I are going to have a baby. You're going to be a big brother." Thomas's eyes widened comically. For a moment, he seemed frozen in place. Then a grin split his face, so like his father's that Eleanor's heart turned over in her chest. "A baby? Really?" He looked from Eleanor to Hayes and back again. "When? Will it be a boy or a girl? Can I help name it?" Eleanor laughed with relief at his enthusiasm. "The baby will come around Christmas time. We don't know yet if it will be a boy or girl. And yes, you can certainly help choose a name." Thomas stepped forward hesitantly. Can I feel it? There's nothing to feel yet, Eleanor explained gently. The baby is still very tiny, but in a few months, you'll be able to feel it move. The boy nodded solemnly, processing this information. Then he surprised both adults by throwing his arms around Eleanor in a fierce hug. I'm glad you're my ma, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. And I'm glad we're having a baby. Our family just keeps getting better. Eleanor held him close, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain such happiness. Over Thomas's head, she met Hayes's gaze, saw in his eyes the same overwhelming gratitude and love that filled her own. This was what she had found in Silvercreek, what she had never dared hope for when she stepped off that train nearly a year ago. Not just safety, not just refuge, but a true home. A place where she belonged completely. A family who had claimed her as their own. As the summer sun bathed them in golden light, the three Morgans, soon to be four, stood together on the porch of the Broken Spur Ranch, bound by love that had overcome the shadows of the past and now reached confidently toward the future. Eleanor Rose Morgan, once a stranger in a strange land, had found her true north at last. In Hayes's steadfast love, in Thomas's open-hearted acceptance, in the new life growing beneath her heart, here was her purpose, her joy, her forever home. The cowboy had indeed made her his family, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she had never truly been a stranger after all. She had simply been waiting to be found.